The face showed up at 2:13 a.m., and the first thing I noticed was how still it was, like a photograph someone had pinned to the world and forgotten. That should have been the hook. Instead, the first thing I remember is the sound of my own breath in the dark, too loud, as if the house had decided to echo me back. I was alone, as always, with a half-empty mug and the blue light from my laptop spilling across the kitchen tiles. The front door camera sits in the upper corner of the porch, cheap plastic and a red rec light that blinks whenever I forget to turn it off. I watch the feed more than I go outside now. It's cheaper than therapy. On the screen, the porch was a pool of washed-out white. Night vision turns the world into a half-memory. Edges bloom, and everything is a little too sharp where it shouldn't be. At first, I thought it was a trick of the pixels, a shadow, the streetlight catching on a coat. Then the head tilted, not by degrees, but as if some hidden hinge had been unlocked. He had eyes that seemed too round for a human face, wide, dark pupils that swallowed the camera's infrared. His mouth was a grin that didn't belong to a mouth that could breathe. Teeth, too many, too close, glinted like old coins. His skin looked powdered, like chalk smeared over bone. He wore nothing I could name. The camera flattened his shape into an anonymous mass. I froze. My phone was on the table, audio muted because I was half asleep to the hum of a late-night documentary. The feed stuttered, 1 second of static, then his face again, closer, like the camera had dipped forward. The timestamp read 027. My heart stepped in time to the numbers. I considered calling someone. I opened the door for fresh air, and the cold hit me like a hand through a blanket, wet, metallic. No footsteps on the porch, no scent of cigarette or damp coat. Only the clean, sterile smell of the night and the faint chemical tang that the camera lens sometimes gives off. I told myself it was an intruder, 2 houses down, a prank, a bug in the system. I replayed the footage 3 times while my hands trembled. He stayed the same place, not blinking, not breathing in any way I could see. When I looked away, only for a moment to text a friend and write something stupid like "someone on my porch," the feed went black for 3 seconds. The rec dot went out. The room felt suddenly heavier, like someone had sat on the back of my neck. When the image returned, he was closer. The timestamp read 2221. A movement outside, soft like cloth whispering over concrete, made every hair on my arms stand up. I stayed where I was because the entire house seemed to be holding its breath with me. I remember counting the seconds in my head, the red numbers on the camera folding in on themselves. I did not go outside. I did not call the police. I hovered over the laptop and watched his face fill the screen until my eyes watered. At 2:15 a.m., the feed died again, but this time the porch light blinked once in the real world, as if confirming the lie on the screen. I told myself I would sleep, that daylight would make sense of it. I woke at 2:13 the next morning with my phone buzzing, a video file from the camera, time-stamped for the night before. After the second night, I stopped trying to explain it out loud. Words felt flabby and useless, like trying to slap a living thing with a damp towel. Instead, I became a collector of evidence. Screenshots with jagged edges, tiny video clips saved to a folder named 0213, timestamps that refused to be rearranged. The man at the door learned to be patient. He never rushed. He arrived at 2:13, stayed for a length of time that the camera could only hint at, and then the feed would stutter back to nothing. The pattern was comfortingly mechanical in a way that made me sick. Method. Ritual. I began to watch the other cameras too. The hallway cam, the baby monitor that was left from when we thought we might want kids someday, the cheap webcam that pointed at the street. He started to show up on those feeds too, always not quite there at first, a smear that resolved into eyes and teeth when I leaned in. Sleep became a rumor. I took cold showers in the middle of the night just to remind my body it could still breathe. The smell followed him. Not exactly rot, but the suggestion of something old and iron-rich, like pennies left to rust in a jar. It smelled stronger when he was closer to the lens. I woke once thinking I heard the porch floor sigh under a weight, but when I turned on every light, the house remained stubbornly empty and obedient. Statues of furniture in a museum that refused to answer me. I tried to show a friend. I sent the clips, small, compressed files that the Messenger app swallowed like excuses. He wrote back with a laughing emoji and a "Dude, are you being serious?" The next morning, I opened my phone to find his reply deleted, no trace. I checked again. The video was still on my phone, time-stamped, glitching like a bad eyelid. I played it and froze at a 2:21 because this time in the corner of the frame, there was a reflection. My reflection, standing at the kitchen counter, holding my phone. I had been sitting on the couch when the recording started. I hadn't moved. I watched my own ghost look up at the camera, and I watched the shadow at the door incline its head in a way that made the reflection smile. At first, I thought it was a coincidence, an artifact of compression. Then I dug through the files on the cloud, old footage, months of dull, reconciled recordings, and found him in the background of clips I never noticed, a slow, patient presence across months. He stood behind a delivery person in a video from February. He lingered by a mailbox in June. The timestamps didn't make sense. In some clips, his face blurred at the edges like it didn't want to be seen. In others, he was in crisp, terrible focus, as if the camera had decided at last that whatever protection it had been affording me was gone. The rules shifted the night my own face appeared in the camera that points inside the house. I was awake. I was watching the feed of the porch, and the porch feed watched me back. The rec dot stayed red. At 2:13, the porch feed filled with static, and for a beat the image collapsed into vertical bands of gray. Then the bands snapped into place, and I saw him, closer than ever. So close the texture of his skin resolved into hairline cracks like dried plaster. Behind him, impossibly, I could see the reflection of my kitchen light in his eyes. He wasn't outside. He was in the frame the way a thought is in a head, impossible to dislodge. When I leaned forward, the chair complained under my weight. The sound was small and human. Something on the screen moved that shouldn't have. The camera on the porch tilted up, as if whatever was controlling it had reached up and nudged it. The angle shifted, and for the first time, the porch became a corridor leading into darkness. There was a slow, deliberate scrape, metal on wood, coming from the speakers. I knew, with the blunt certainty of something that has already happened, that whatever it was wanted something from me. The feed froze, then the rec dot blinked off. My phone vibrated with a new file. I opened it with fingers that did not belong to me and watched a single, long frame, the silhouette of a hand pressed against the other side of the glass. Palm flat, long fingers splayed. Then the camera cut out. After that, I started to dream in timestamps. Dreams that began at 2:12 and finished at 2:14. Dreams where the man peered through the grain of my life like a fault line. I'd wake with the taste of pennies in my mouth and the exact sound of the porch boards underfoot imprinted in my ears. The house seemed to rearrange itself in small ways to accommodate his presence. A mug moved a centimeter. A picture leaned a fraction. Little betrayals. My keys would be on the counter when I was sure I'd left them in the bowl by the door. The television would switch channels to static. I tried unplugging the cameras. I took one down and smashed the lens with a hammer I keep for emergencies. The next morning, the feed from that same camera was intact on my cloud account, as if the camera had never been touched. I began to understand, with that low animal clarity that arrives when fear becomes knowledge, that he was not simply appearing. He was mapping me. He was learning the lines my life followed and choosing, with patient cruelty, where to step next. The only pattern I could trust was the one that made my chest hollow and my hands cold. 2:13. The only certainty I had left was that the next night would be worse. I stopped pretending there was a plan. Plans were for people who believed the world answered to logic. I had tried to outsmart whatever this was, moving the cameras, changing passwords, sleeping on friends' couches, but the map it was drawing of me was not on a screen. It was under my skin. It was in the soft architecture of my life, where I left my coffee, how I turned the key, the exact cadence of my footsteps. The only thing that mattered was time. 2 minutes before 2:13, I would feel a pressure behind my eyes, like someone pressing their thumb just beneath the bridge of my nose. 1 minute before, my mouth would taste like metal. At 2:13, everything else would go quiet, and a new, smaller world would slide into place over the one I thought I owned. That night, I decided to meet it on terms it understood. I set up cameras in every blind spot, looped them to a hard drive that could not be touched by the cloud. I covered the porch with motion sensors, laid talismans and meaningless superstitions on the sill. Salt, a broken mirror, a child's toy, and I sat with a thermos of coffee at the kitchen table like a sentry. The house hummed around me, the refrigerator's low throb a heartbeat I could count on. At 2:12, I stood and walked slowly to the front window, fingers ghosting the cold glass. Outside, the world was a smear of wet light and distant traffic, the kind that felt patient and indifferent. Inside, my skin had the rough electric quality it gets before a storm. 2:13 arrived like a blade sliding free. The porch light guttered. The thermostat clicked. All the cameras caught the same thing. A shape pressing against the porch glass, breath frosting the pane in a slow, terrible rhythm. I could hear the sound on the feed, a wet, patient rasp that made the hairs along my forearms stand up. He did not knock. He did not speak. He only watched, and the watching sounded like a dozen small clocks beating at once. I waited until my pulse matched the feed, and then I opened the door. The porch was colder than the night, as if the temperature itself conspired with him. The handprints were there immediately, long, thin prints across the glass, like someone had dragged the fingers down and up in a nervous pattern. Salt had scattered across the threshold, and the grains were cleanly interrupted by darkness, as if a glove had passed over them and not touched. My breath fogged in the air in front of me, my own reflection a smear in the doorway. I leaned forward until my forehead nearly touched the glass, searching for some human logic. Ragged skin, a coat, anything I could reason with. His face filled the window in a way the camera had never quite conveyed. Close enough now to see the tiny crabbed veins at the corner of his eyes, the dust that clung to the angles of his mouth. Then the sound shifted. Not from outside, but from inside my own house, like a mirror unthreading. It was the scrape of something along wood, the hinge over my bedroom door moving from closed to open. The kitchen light behind me dimmed by a fraction, and in that second I understood a truth that is colder than fear. This thing could imitate absence. It could be on the porch, and it could also be the shape sliding along the walls behind me. It folded itself on top of my life until I could not tell which image was older. I stepped back, more from reflex than strategy, and my phone buzzed in my pocket. A notification, a new file uploaded to my hard drive. The name was a timestamp. I opened it with trembling hands. For 3 minutes and 12 seconds, the video showed the porch as I had left it, empty, still. And then, in the final frame, it showed me. Not me in the moment, but me somehow a half beat from now. Smiling, hair damp at the temple, my eyes glazed in a way I didn't recognize. I saw myself raise a hand and press it to the glass. The camera showed my palm flatten, the long fingers splayed. I felt the same movement in my own hand while I watched it happen on the screen, and a sick widening opened under my sternum, like a trapdoor. I tried to run. My legs moved with the clumsy faith of anyone who has thought themselves faster than fate. The hallway lights flickered, and in each doorway, a shadow unpeeled itself from the dark and walked like a sleepwalker. I slammed the back door open, thinking only to get outside, to put the distance that might mean anything. The yard was the same as always, familiar, useless. But there were prints in the mud that were not human. They wandered in a careless pattern toward the neighbor's fence and then back, as if whatever had made them had been circling and learning the geometry of escape. In the hedge at the end of the lawn, something moved with an intelligence that had nothing to do with animal hunger. It paused, and in that pause I heard a sound not registered by any camera, the whisper of cloth and the soft suction of lips against wood. I realized then that the cameras were not windows. They were doors. The thing didn't need to be outside to speak to me. It needed only the glimpse of me looking out. Each time I watched, I taught it a new way to be. Each time I bared my face to a lens, I was giving it a face to wear. The last thing I remember clearly is standing at the kitchen table with my palm on the glass and the man on the other side putting his hand to the same place, matching mine with the terrible, natural patience of a creature learning to be me. The house hummed. The cameras recorded. the hard drive saved. Somewhere between the frames, I felt a pressure at the bridge of my nose, familiar, unwanted. And then the world tilted, like the careful closing of a book. When I woke, it was morning, and everything looked as if sleep had never been broken. Sunlight in the sink, a mug where I'd left it, the hum of the refrigerator. I pulled the footage and watched until my eyes blurred. For 2 minutes and 13 seconds, the man stood outside and watched me watch him. At 2:13:21, the video cut to black. On my porch, in the layer of dust where the talismans had lain, there were prints. They were my size. They were not my hands. He is where I used to be.
Subscribe to Horror Stories.